There comes a moment when the noise of the world grows so loud, you can no longer hear your own heartbeat. That is the moment to step away, not in defeat, but in defiance. Solitude is not your enemy, it is your teacher. Today, I challenge you to walk into the quiet, not to escape life, but to find the strength, clarity, and purpose that only silence can give. Solitude is strength, not weakness. Yet how often is the man who seeks it painted as wounded, incomplete, or hiding from the world? Nietzsche would scoff at such a misunderstanding. In his eyes, the man who dares to be alone is not broken. He is proving his capacity to stand without leaning, to walk without being carried. This is no small feat, for most men do not truly wish to be alone with themselves. They fear that in the quiet, their masks will crack and reveal faces they do not wish to see. To be strong in solitude is to possess a rare kind of courage. It is not the courage of the battlefield, where adrenaline and camaraderie mask the fear. It is the courage of the empty room, where no one watches, no one applauds, and you must confront yourself without distraction. Nietzsche knew that the crowd offers a comfortable hiding place for those who have not yet met themselves. In the noise, you can lose the sound of your own thoughts. In the bustle, you can avoid asking the questions that matter. Who am I without my roles, my titles, my attachments? What do I stand for when there is no one to witness my stand? The man who is strong in solitude is not immune to loneliness, he simply refuses to let it dictate his choices. Loneliness may knock, but it finds no easy purchase in a soul that is anchored. The weak man seeks constant company not out of love for others, but out of fear of himself. He dreads the silence because it might reveal that he has built his life upon borrowed values and unexamined beliefs. The strong man, in contrast, steps into silence willingly, for he knows that the self is not discovered in the eyes of others, but in the depths of one's own being. Nietzsche's vision of strength was never about brute force, it was about the will to overcome. And what greater challenge is there than to overcome the need for constant approval? In solitude, the man learns that his worth is not determined by how many voices cheer his name. He begins to create from within, drawing upon his own wellspring rather than drinking endlessly from the fountains of others' opinions. In this way, solitude becomes not a prison but a forge, a place where the raw metal of the self is heated, hammered, and shaped into something resilient. Consider the difference between isolation and chosen solitude. Isolation is imposed, it starves the soul. Chosen solitude is deliberate, it feeds the soul. The man who chooses to be alone does so not to withdraw from life, but to engage it more deeply. He steps back from the crowd, not because he despises it, but because he refuses to let it drown out the inner voice that guides his path. Nietzsche himself often retreated to the mountains, not because he could not bear the company of others, but because he wished to hear his thoughts with the clarity only vast silence could provide. Strength in solitude is also the refusal to be defined by external noise. In a world addicted to constant connection, where the value of a man is often measured by his visibility, the solitary man breaks the rules. He does not measure his days by how often he is noticed, but by how deeply he has lived them. This defiance unsettles those who depend on the crowd for their identity, for it forces them to consider that perhaps strength is not in being everywhere, but in being entirely present where you are, even if that place is alone. Solitude demands discipline. Without it, the quiet can decay into idleness. The strong man uses solitude as a crucible for growth. He reads, reflects, writes, creates, or simply observes. He studies his own mind as a philosopher studies the world, noting the patterns of thought, the impulses of emotion, and the seeds of ideas that emerge in stillness. Nietzsche would say that this is where the true work of becoming takes place, not in the grand gestures seen by all, but in the invisible labor of shaping the self in private. In this way, solitude becomes a form of training. Just as the warrior sharpens his blade before battle, the solitary man sharpens his mind and spirit for the trials of life. When he returns to the company of others, he is not drained by them, nor desperate for their approval. He meets them as an equal, bringing something to share rather than something to take. His strength allows him to give freely, for he no longer fears being emptied. Those who misunderstand solitude often imagine it as selfish, but Nietzsche saw it as the foundation for true generosity. A man who has not filled himself in solitude will always seek to take from others their time, their energy, their validation. A man who has been made strong in solitude gives from abundance. He can listen without needing to speak, support without needing to be the center, love without needing to possess. His relationships are richer because they are not built on dependence but on choice. To stand alone is to test the very roots of your being. It is to see if you can hold your ground without the scaffolding of constant reassurance. Nietzsche's solitary man is not a recluse fleeing from life's demands. He is a creator preparing to shape life on his own terms. He walks into solitude not to vanish, but to return with something worth bringing back. In this his strength is both personal and generative. It sustains him and enriches the world around him. The man who learns that solitude is strength finds that he no longer fears losing the crowd, for he has found himself. And once you have found yourself, you are no longer at the mercy of being found by others. The applause becomes a pleasant echo, not the measure of your worth. The company of others becomes a joy, not a necessity, and the quiet once feared becomes a sanctuary in which you meet not your emptiness but your fullness. Nietzsche would tell you that such a man is not diminished by walking alone. He is elevated by it, for he walks not away from the world, but toward the highest version of himself. Silence builds clarity, and clarity is the foundation of a strong mind. Nietzsche knew that in a world overflowing with voices, the rarest voice to hear is your own. The man who is constantly surrounded by noise, conversations, obligations, demands, begins to forget the sound of his own thoughts. He starts to live in reaction, not creation. His decisions are shaped less by his own will, and more by the constant push and pull of the crowd. But the man who seeks silence willingly steps out of this current. He does not drift with the tide, he walks his own path, guided by the compass of his own insight. Silence is not simply the absence of sound, it is the absence of interference. It is a clearing where the mind can spread its roots deep and wide without being trampled. In silence, the thoughts that matter rise to the surface, no longer drowned by the shallow chatter of the world. Nietzsche would say that to become who you truly are, you must step away from the herd long enough to hear what your soul has been trying to tell you all along. This is not an act of arrogance, but an act of survival for the spirit. In the stillness, a man begins to see himself as he is, not as others tell him he is. Without the constant influence of voices praising or criticizing, he measures himself by his own standards. This is a frightening thing for many, because it strips away the safety net of excuses. In the noise you can hide. In the silence there is nowhere to go. Every flaw, every strength, every contradiction comes into view. Nietzsche would call this the essential confrontation, the moment where you are forced to stand naked before yourself and decide whether to turn away or begin the work of transformation. The clarity found in silence is not sudden enlightenment, it is a gradual sharpening. At first the quiet may seem empty, even oppressive, because the mind has been trained to seek constant stimulation. But as the days and hours pass, that emptiness becomes space, space to think, to imagine, to understand. Thoughts that once flashed by like birds in a storm, now settle long enough for you to study them. You begin to notice patterns in your thinking, recurring fears, hidden desires, and in this noticing, you gain the power to change them. Nietzsche knew that the crowd thrives on distraction, because distraction keeps people from asking dangerous questions. Dangerous questions like, is this life truly mine, or am I simply living the life I was told to live? Am I chasing goals that I believe in, or ones I inherited from someone else's expectations? Silence is where these questions can finally be asked without being drowned out. And once they are asked, they demand answers. Clarity is not always comfortable, but it is always liberating. The man who makes a habit of seeking silence develops a kind of inner sight. He becomes able to see through the fog of opinion and trend that blinds so many. He can hear the intention behind words, sense the true nature of situations, and make decisions that align with his deepest values rather than the passing mood of the crowd. This clarity is a kind of armor. It protects him from manipulation, from the emotional contagion of panic or rage that sweeps through groups. He becomes less reactive, more deliberate, and far more difficult to control. Silence also refines the way a man communicates. When you spend time listening to your own thoughts, you begin to speak with greater precision. You no longer feel the need to fill every space with words. Nietzsche often wrote in sharp, concise aphorisms, understanding that clarity is born from economy. The fewer the words, the stronger they must be. The man who has learned from silence carries this into his life. His words become weightier, his presence more commanding, because he does not waste either on the trivial. This is not to say that silence turns a man into a recluse or a cold observer. On the contrary, the man who knows the value of silence often values conversation more, because he has something worth sharing. He does not speak to be heard, he speaks to contribute. His clarity allows him to listen better as well, because he no longer fears being influenced by every voice. He can hear others without losing himself in their noise. Nietzsche would argue that the man without clarity is a man without direction, and the man without direction is at the mercy of the winds. Silence is the still point where direction is found. It is in the moments when nothing is happening on the outside that the most important movements occur within. A single hour of true silence can sometimes do more for a man's life than a year of ceaseless activity, because it aligns him with his own path instead of scattering him across the paths of others. To build clarity in silence is to train the mind as one would train a blade. At first it is rough and dull, easily chipped by the grind of the world, but each moment of quiet reflection hones it sharper. You cut away confusion, you pare down illusions, you strip life to its essentials. And when the time comes to act, you do so with precision and force, not flailing in all directions. The strong man does not fear the silence because he has learned that it is not empty. It is full of the answers he has been seeking, full of the truths he has been avoiding, full of the strength he thought he could only find in the approval of others. In silence he realizes that the world's noise was never a source of power, it was a thief of it. And in reclaiming his clarity, he reclaims his life. Nietzsche's philosophy reminds us that the man who can stand in silence and see clearly is a man who can walk into the noise of the world without being lost in it. Solitude breeds self-reliance, and self-reliance is the truest test of a man's strength. Nietzsche would tell you that it is easy to appear capable when the world is holding you up, when there are people to lean on, structures to guide you, and familiar routines to keep you moving forward. But remove the crowd, take away the scaffolding, and many men collapse into themselves. It is in solitude that the measure of your independence is revealed, for when you stand alone, you have no one to carry you but yourself. Self-reliance is not the arrogant claim that you need no one ever. Even Nietzsche acknowledged the necessity of human connection. It is the understanding that your existence, your direction, and your sense of worth do not depend entirely on the hands or voices of others. In solitude, this truth becomes unavoidable. There is no one to blame for your inaction, no one to praise you into momentum. The responsibility for your life rests fully in your own grasp. Many resist solitude for precisely this reason. It forces them to admit that they are the authors of their own fate, whether they are proud of the story or ashamed of it. Nietzsche's solitary man is not a man who rejects the world, but one who refuses to be owned by it. Self-reliance is the discipline of cultivating an inner foundation so strong that the shifting winds of opinion, fortune, or circumstance cannot tear it down. In solitude, you must make your own decisions without the safety of consensus. You must solve problems without the ready-made answers that others provide. You must feed your spirit without relying on someone else's encouragement to feel alive. This is a demanding way to live, but it forges a kind of strength that cannot be faked. Think of it as a trial by fire. When you are alone, there is no immediate applause for your efforts, no visible reward for your perseverance. You have to learn to keep going because you have decided it is worth it, not because the world told you so. Nietzsche admired those who could do this, for they had mastered the rare art of drawing energy from within, rather than feeding endlessly on the approval of the crowd. This independence of spirit is the foundation for all true freedom, for a man who depends entirely on others for his sense of value will always be at their mercy. In solitude, self-reliance also takes on a practical form. You learn to solve your own challenges without waiting for rescue. Whether it is the smallest of daily tasks or the largest of life's turning points, you become the one you can depend on. This builds not only competence but also confidence, the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing that you have faced difficulty before and emerged intact. Nietzsche believed that confidence grounded in reality, in the actual proof of your own resilience, was worth far more than the bravado of those who have never been tested. But there is another dimension to self-reliance that Solitude teaches, the ability to be your own source of meaning. Many people anchor their identity entirely in the roles they play for others, the friend, the lover, the provider, the achiever. Take these roles away, and they are left hollow. In Solitude, you are stripped of these external definitions. You must confront the question, who am I, without the stage and without the audience. It is in answering this question that you begin to construct a self that is not a performance but a reality. This is the self that can walk into any crowd without being lost in it, because it does not need to dissolve into the identities handed to it by others. Nietzsche would argue that self-reliance born in solitude is not a rejection of help, but a rejection of dependence as a way of life. A self-reliant man can collaborate without being consumed, can love without clinging, and can lead without enslaving himself to the approval of those he leads. He gives freely because he does not fear being emptied. His well is filled from within. This is why the man who has learned to stand alone often makes the strongest ally and the most trustworthy friend. He is with you because he chooses to be, not because he cannot survive without you. There is also a moral dimension to this kind of self-reliance. In solitude, without the constant presence of others to regulate your actions, you must become your own lawgiver. You decide what you will and will not do, what you will stand for and what you will refuse. There is no one to correct you in every moment, no one to enforce discipline for you. It must come from your own will. Nietzsche saw this as the birth of true integrity. When your actions align with your principles, even when no one is watching, you have stepped into genuine moral strength. This kind of self-reliance changes how you approach the world when you return to it. You are no longer seeking to be carried, you are seeking to contribute. You are not clinging to people out of fear, you are choosing them out of respect. You are not obeying rules out of habit, you are living by values you have consciously chosen. This independence does not isolate you. It makes you more capable of forming deep, healthy and honest connections, because you are not hiding behind need or pretense. Nietzsche's philosophy reminds us that the self-reliant man forged in solitude is the one who can face the uncertainty of life with open eyes. He does not crumble when the crowd turns against him or when circumstances shift. He does not panic when help is delayed, nor does he sell his convictions cheaply in exchange for comfort. He stands, not because it is easy, but because he has built himself to stand. In a world where so many are quick to lean, he is among the few who can carry. And that, Nietzsche would say, is why solitude, far from weakening a man, becomes the proving ground where he discovers the full strength of his own 2 feet. Walking alone refines purpose, for the man who dares to journey without the constant company of others begins to see the world, and himself, without distortion. Nietzsche understood this with a clarity few have matched. When you remove the noise, the crowd, and the endless stream of influences pressing upon you, what remains is the raw terrain of your own mind, and in that terrain, your true direction is revealed. Purpose is not something handed to you. It is something unearthed in the quiet, often after a long excavation. When you are surrounded by others, you are always subject to their gravity. Their desires, fears, and ambitions tug at you subtly, shaping your choices without your conscious consent. The danger is not that they are malicious, most are not, but that they are loud. In the constant chatter of advice, comparison, and expectation, your own voice is drowned out. The man who walks alone steps outside of this gravitational pull. He stops moving in circles drawn by other people's orbits, and begins to chart his own trajectory. Nietzsche would call this the first step toward becoming who you are, to think, decide and act from a place unpolluted by the herd's demands. Purpose discovered in solitude has a purity that cannot be imitated. It is not built to please, nor designed for applause. It is not constructed from borrowed dreams. Instead, it emerges from direct confrontation with the questions that matter. What am I willing to suffer for? What would I pursue even if no one noticed or approved? What would make my life feel lived, even if it came at great cost? These are dangerous questions to ask in the middle of a crowd, because the answers may offend, challenge, or confuse others. But in solitude, there is no need to soften the truth. The man can be brutally honest with himself, and from this honesty, direction is born. Nietzsche believed that purpose is inseparable from self-overcoming, the act of surpassing who you were yesterday. Walking alone forces this kind of growth, because it removes the easy crutches we lean on to avoid hard choices. Without the crowd's validation, you must find a reason to act that comes from within. Without someone constantly guiding you, you must learn to guide yourself. This is uncomfortable at first, even frightening. But as you endure it, your decisions become sharper, your motivations cleaner, and your goals more aligned with your authentic self. The man who refines his purpose in solitude does not rush to declare it to the world. He tests it quietly, living it day by day, measuring its weight against the reality of life. In Nietzsche's eyes, this patience is part of its strength. Purpose is forged too quickly, often in the heat of imitation or the desire for immediate recognition, are brittle. They crumble under the first real pressure, but a purpose refined in the stillness of solitude is tempered like steel. It is tested not by applause, but by the silence that demands you hold to it even when no one is watching. There is also a humility in this process, though it is not the false humility of pretending to be less than you are. It is the humility of knowing that purpose is not something you invent out of thin air, but something you discover through discipline, reflection, and lived experience. Walking alone teaches this because it strips away illusions about how quickly life yields its answers. You learn to sit with uncertainty, to listen more than you speak, to observe without immediately labeling. And in this space, purpose begins to reveal itself in ways you could not have planned. Nietzsche often spoke of the creator, the one who builds values, rather than merely inheriting them. Walking alone is the path of the creator, for it demands that you take full responsibility for the shape of your life. There is no one to follow blindly, no ready-made template to copy. You become the architect of your days, deciding which stones to lay and which to discard. This is a heavy responsibility, but it is also the deepest freedom. For when you finally step back into the world, your path is your own, not a borrowed one, not a convenient one, but one that has been tested and proven in the solitude where you refined it. Purpose shaped in solitude also changes the way you relate to others. You no longer need them to tell you where to go, though you may value their perspective. You do not bend your vision to fit their comfort, though you may walk beside them when paths align. You love and connect from a place of strength, not from the need to be directed or saved. This allows for relationships that are freer, more honest, and more enduring, because they are not built on mutual dependence but on mutual respect. Nietzsche would remind you that the world often misunderstands the man who walks alone. To many he appears aloof, strange, perhaps even lost. But this is only because they measure purpose by visibility, by the pace at which one moves, by the number of voices cheering along the way. The solitary man moves differently. He moves according to his own rhythm, one that is tuned to the deep pulse of his inner life. And though his journey may seem slow or meandering from the outside, it is deliberate, every step a refinement, every pause a choice. In the end, the man who walks alone to refine his purpose returns to the world with something rare, a direction that is unshakable. It cannot be bought, sold, or stolen, because it was not given by anyone else. It cannot be broken by rejection or failure, because it was not built on the promise of reward. It endures because it belongs wholly to him, shaped by his own hand in the crucible of solitude. Nietzsche would see in such a man the embodiment of strength, not just the strength to endure life, but the strength to shape it with intention and to live it without apology. So what do these truths reveal when woven together? That solitude is not the mark of a broken man, but the training ground of a complete one. In the quiet, he learns that strength is born not from the crowd's embrace, but from standing alone with himself. Silence sharpens his clarity, stripping away illusions until only truth remains.
Self-reliance grows in that stillness, freeing him from the chains of dependence. And in walking alone, he refines a purpose that is untouchable by the shifting winds of opinion. Nietzsche would remind us that such a man does not return from solitude diminished. He returns as a creator, armed with vision, discipline, and the will to shape his own destiny. This is not isolation, it is elevation, and it belongs to the few who dare to face themselves without flinching.